The galaxy was wide and endless, filled with countless civilizations, empires, and ancient powers. Among those powers stood the Galactic Dominion, a mighty empire that had ruled for centuries with an iron hand. Its fleets were legendary across the stars, known for their size and destruction. Entire worlds had fallen to their ships, entire races had been forced into slavery. Their admirals were feared, and their armies marched across planets, leaving only ashes behind. For them, Earth was nothing more than a new name on their long list of conquered worlds. They had heard of humans only in whispers from scattered scouts and merchants. To the Dominion, humans were weak and untested, a primitive people who had just begun to reach beyond their small world. The Dominion did not fear them. The Dominion only desired to crush them. High above the Dominion's core world, in a council chamber built of steel and glass, the admirals gathered. They spoke with certainty. They believed Earth would fall in a matter of hours. Admiral Korath, tall and draped in his black uniform, promised the council that Earth would be humbled. His words echoed through the chamber as holograms of Earth's blue oceans and green continents glowed before them. He spoke of victory, of the resources they would take, and of how quickly humanity would kneel. He smiled, believing there was no chance of resistance. But far away, beneath the soil of Nevada, a secret command center waited in silence. Buried deep below mountains, hidden from all scanners, men and women worked day and night. They had known this day would come. Humans had been preparing for years, quietly watching, listening, and learning from every alien signal they could capture. Captain Aaron Blake stood at the center of the control room. His uniform was simple, his voice calm, but his eyes carried the weight of the world. Around him, giant screens showed star charts, defense lines, and coded transmissions. He did not speak of fear. He spoke only of readiness. Humanity had no choice but to stand and fight. Above ground, life seemed normal. Families walked in cities, children played in parks, and traffic flowed on busy roads. But behind the calm surface, governments had already told their leaders the truth. The fleet was coming. Every nation had agreed to one plan, one chance to survive. They had put aside their differences and their rivalries. For the first time in history, humanity was united under one cause: to protect their home. Underground shelters were ready, medical centers had been prepared, and supplies had been gathered. The people did not yet know the full danger, but whispers had spread. Everyone could feel that something vast was approaching. In the control room, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell monitored signals from orbit. Her hands moved quickly across the glowing panels as she tracked unknown transmissions. She had always been sharp and steady, and tonight her calmness was needed more than ever. She turned to Aaron Blake and spoke softly, telling him the first signs of movement were appearing at the edge of the solar system. The Dominion was here. They had entered the system with hundreds of ships. Each ship was large enough to crush a city, their weapons glowing with power. But Sarah's voice never shook. She simply reported the truth. Elsewhere, Commander Daniel Brooks activated defense protocols. He had trained for years in silence, hiding his work even from his own family. He walked through the bunker halls, checking the soldiers and engineers who stood ready. They were young men and women, some barely older than 20, yet none hesitated. They had chosen to stand in the shadows and fight for Earth when the day came. Their weapons were not ordinary. For decades, scientists had worked secretly, using fragments of alien wrecks recovered from hidden crashes. They had built weapons far beyond what the Dominion expected. Earth had hidden its strength carefully, and now those weapons were waiting to be unleashed. The night sky above the planet was calm, filled with stars. People in cities looked up and saw nothing but the familiar constellations. But in the darkness beyond the reach of human eyes, the Dominion's fleet was arriving. Dozens of carriers, cruisers, and destroyers came out of warp, their engines glowing like fire. The sight would have filled most worlds with terror. Each ship was built with dark metal, their hulls covered in weapons that could tear apart moons. Their formation was flawless, their discipline absolute. This was the fleet that had ended countless civilizations. Now it turned its attention toward the small blue planet called Earth. In the cities, the news began to break. Broadcasts showed strange lights far beyond the orbit of Mars. Some called them meteors, others called them comets. But those who knew the truth recognized them at once. They were ships larger than anything humanity had ever seen. Panic spread quickly. Families gathered their children and people crowded into shelters. But even in the fear, there was something else. There was a growing determination. Across every continent, people whispered to each other, Humanity would not bow. Back in Nevada, Aaron Blake stood still as reports came in. His officers worked quickly, their voices steady though their faces were pale. Sarah Mitchell tracked the fleet's movements. Daniel Brooks confirmed that the defenses were ready, and dozens of unknown soldiers waited for their commands. Aaron finally spoke. His words were simple, his tone quiet, but every person in the bunker felt their weight. He said humanity would not surrender. He said Earth had one chance and they would take it. He said the time had come to show the galaxy who humans truly were. In orbit, silent machines began to awaken. Hidden satellites disguised as harmless objects powered up. Shields long built into the sky shimmered for the first time. On the moon, secret hangars opened, releasing ships that had never been seen by the public. Deep in asteroid belts, giant weapons prepared to fire. All of it had been hidden, waiting for this moment. Humanity had planned carefully, keeping its secrets from the galaxy. The Dominion thought they were attacking a weak and untested race. What they would find instead was something entirely different. And so the night stretched on. The Dominion ships drew closer, their weapons ready, their admirals certain of victory. On Earth, people prayed, scientists checked their instruments, and soldiers gripped their rifles. The silence before the storm was heavy, pressing on every heart. Yet beneath the fear there was fire. Humanity had been underestimated too many times. Now as the first glimmers of the fleet appeared on the edge of Earth's sky, humanity stood united. The world held its breath, waiting for the battle that would decide its future among the stars. The stars above Earth began to vanish, hidden by the shadows of enormous alien ships. Hundreds of vessels, each large enough to hold entire cities, slid into orbit one after another. The sky looked like it was filled with moving mountains of steel. These were the ships of the Dominion, the empire that had destroyed countless civilizations. To the rest of the galaxy, the sight of these ships meant only one thing: surrender or death. But to humans, this sight lit a fire in their hearts. In cities all over the planet, people stopped and stared at the night sky. Strange lights flashed above the clouds. News channels tried to keep up, showing blurry images of massive objects drifting above Earth. People whispered to one another, unsure if the world was ending or if they were about to witness something greater. Parents held their children closer, soldiers tightened their grips on weapons, and leaders of every nation gave the same order: prepare for the fight. In the hidden bunkers under Nevada, Captain Aaron Blake stood calmly in the command room. Around him, officers worked quickly, their voices low but steady. The screens showed the fleet as it spread across Earth's orbit. The Dominion was positioning itself for the first strike. Aaron did not look afraid. His face was calm, his eyes steady. He had expected this moment for years. Humanity had not built defenses just for show. They had studied, planned, and waited. Now their time had come. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell leaned over her console, her eyes scanning streams of data. She tracked every ship, every movement. The Dominion fleet was forming attack patterns, preparing to unleash their firepower. Her fingers moved quickly across the glowing panel. She reported to Aaron that the first wave was ready to fire. Her voice was calm, almost cold, but inside she felt the weight of billions of lives. She glanced at Aaron, and in that glance she found her strength. She knew he would not let Earth fall. The Dominion's admirals watched from their flagship. They believed victory was certain. They had seen humans on old records, primitive, divided, weak. To them, Earth was nothing but another world to be crushed. Admiral Korath sneered as his officers reported that Earth's defenses were invisible. No warships waited to challenge them. No planetary shields glowed from the surface. To him, it looked like Earth was defenseless. He ordered his gunners to prepare a strike that would burn a human city to the ground. He wanted fear to spread before the rest of the planet was destroyed. The first beams of light cut through space and pierced Earth's atmosphere. They were bright, violent, and powerful enough to turn skyscrapers into ashes. Millions watched the glowing streaks fall, thinking it was the end. But then something happened. The beams struck nothing. They vanished into thin air. Invisible shields shimmered across the sky, their outlines glowing faintly as they absorbed the energy. The Dominion officers stared in shock. This was not possible. Humans were not supposed to have such power. Yet here it was, stretching across the sky like a second atmosphere. Back in the bunker, Commander Daniel Brooks gave the signal. It was time. All across the solar system, humanity's hidden strength revealed itself. From asteroid fields, Massive railguns emerged, their barrels glowing as they prepared to fire. From the moon's surface, hidden hangars opened, releasing sleek ships armed with weapons the Dominion had never seen. In deep orbit, satellites disguised as debris powered up, creating networks of energy that connected into something greater. Humanity had hidden all of this for decades, waiting for the right moment. Now the trap was sprung. The railguns fired first. Slugs of dense metal accelerated to unimaginable speeds streaked through the darkness. They struck Dominion battleships before the aliens even realized what was happening. Entire vessels exploded, breaking apart in silence, their remains drifting through orbit. The aliens had not even fired a second volley before their first ships were gone. The humans had struck back. On the horizon station, Aaron gave the next command. Stealth drones swarmed forward, their small frames almost invisible to scanners. They weaved through the enemy fleet, attaching themselves to engines and weapons. A moment later, explosions rippled across Dominion ships as systems shut down, leaving vessels adrift and helpless. Sarah Mitchell directed the drones with precision, her calm voice guiding them into the perfect spots. She felt no triumph, only focus. Every second mattered, and every move saved lives on the ground. In cities across Earth, people began to cheer. They saw flashes of light in the sky, and for the first time they realized humanity was fighting back. Hope replaced fear. Families in shelters whispered prayers, soldiers smiled for the first time, and leaders spoke with stronger voices. The world had been underestimated for too long. Now the truth was burning across the stars. On the Dominion flagship, chaos erupted. Officers shouted in disbelief as reports flooded in. Ship after ship was falling, destroyed or disabled by human weapons. Admiral Korath slammed his hand on the command table, demanding explanations. He had believed Earth was a weak target. Now he saw his proud fleet crumbling in minutes. Fear, an emotion he had not felt in decades, spread through him. His voice shook as he ordered his ships to regroup. But already the formations were breaking apart. In space, human warships surged from hiding. They had been built in silence, constructed in secret bases, and tested under cloaks of secrecy. Now they charged forward, sleek and deadly. Pilots like Megan Carter and Jason Hayes flew their vessels with unmatched precision, guided by neural-linked systems that allowed them to react faster than thought. They tore through enemy squadrons, blasting apart fighters and cruisers alike. Each strike was clean, each movement sharp. The aliens tried to match them, but they were too slow, too heavy, too unprepared. For every Dominion ship that fell, humanity grew stronger. The alien fleet was massive, but it was no longer invincible. The trap had been set too perfectly. The humans had studied their enemies, learned their patterns, and built weapons specifically to counter them. Every piece of technology the Dominion had used to dominate the stars now turned against them. The invaders had no answer. On Earth, people stood outside their homes, staring at the sky. The night was filled with flashes of light, silent explosions high above. Children pointed, parents held them close, and neighbors whispered to one another. They did not know every detail of the battle, but they knew one thing for certain. Humanity was not falling. Humanity was rising. The Dominion fleet struggled to survive. Admirals shouted orders. Ships tried to retreat, but it was too late. The battle had only begun, but already the outcome was changing. Humanity had revealed its hand, and it was stronger than anyone had imagined. The galaxy would never see Earth the same way again. And as Aaron Blake stood in the command center, his eyes on the screen, he whispered words that only his closest officers heard. He said the fight was far from over, but humanity had already taken the first step into its destiny among the stars. The first strike had stunned the Dominion fleet. Ships that had once seemed untouchable were breaking apart in silence. Their wreckage drifted in Earth's orbit, glowing faintly against the dark sky. But the battle was far from finished. The Dominion still had hundreds of ships, and their admirals believed they could overwhelm the humans if they pressed forward. With anger boiling in their hearts, they prepared to unleash their true power. They would burn Earth to the ground no matter the cost. On the horizon station, Captain Aaron Blake stood tall as the room buzzed with activity. His officers worked quickly, feeding him information, adjusting strategies, and guiding human forces across the battlefield. He kept his voice calm as he gave orders, his tone steady despite the chaos outside. He knew that if fear spread through his command center, humanity's chances would collapse. Calmness was his weapon. Focus was his strength. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell leaned close to her console, her fingers dancing across glowing panels. Her eyes tracked the movements of Dominion warships as they shifted into new formations. She reported that the enemy was preparing a second wave. This wave was larger, more coordinated, and aimed directly at Earth's surface. Her voice was clear, but her chest felt heavy. She knew millions of lives were at risk if even one barrage slipped through. She glanced toward Aaron again, finding her steadiness in his quiet presence. In the Dominion flagship, Admiral Korath barked orders with fury. His voice thundered through the command deck as officers scrambled to obey. He ordered every cruiser, every destroyer, and every fighter to concentrate their fire. He demanded that Earth's shields be shattered, that their defenses be torn apart. The Admiral's pride could not accept what had happened. His fleet was supposed to be unstoppable. To him, the thought of losing to humans was impossible. His rage burned brighter than the stars outside his windows. The second volley came. Beams of energy, bright as suns, streaked down toward Earth. Entire squadrons fired at once, their combined power enough to melt continents. But again, the beams met resistance. The invisible shields glowed faintly as they absorbed the fury of the attack. Cities below trembled, but they did not fall. For the second time, the Dominion realized their weapons were not enough. Their pride began to crumble. Fear started to whisper among them. Commander Daniel Brooks gave the order to strike back. Humanity's railguns fired once more, their slugs tearing through enemy vessels. Stealth drones slipped between cruisers, planting explosives and shutting down engines. Human warships surged forward, meeting the Dominion head-on. Pilots like Megan Carter and Jason Hayes flew their fighters in sharp patterns, weaving through enemy fire. They struck with speed and precision, their neural-linked systems guiding them faster than instinct. Every hit from their weapons tore apart enemy fighters, sending fire and wreckage spiraling into the void. The Dominion tried to adjust. Squadrons regrouped, admirals shouted commands, but their enemy was unlike any they had faced. Humans were not fighting like prey. They fought like predators. Every move was calculated, every strike was exact. The Dominion's size and power meant little when their formations collapsed again and again. Panic grew as more ships exploded in bursts of light, their pieces scattering across the sky. On Earth, people crowded together in shelters, staring at screens that showed the battle above. They gasped at the flashes in the heavens, cheering when Dominion ships burned. Children pointed to the night sky, asking their parents if those lights meant Earth was winning. The parents smiled, even if their smiles hid fear. For the first time in history, all of humanity looked upward together. They were no longer divided by borders. They were united by survival. Inside the command center, Sarah Mitchell called out a warning. A massive Dominion carrier was descending lower, preparing to pierce the shields with concentrated fire. If it succeeded, it could level an entire city. Aaron's voice rang through the bunker, commanding the Horizon Station's railguns to focus fire. The screens lit up with the streaks of metal slugs, each one moving faster than sound could carry. They slammed into the carrier, tearing holes in its dark hull. Explosions burst from within, and moments later, the giant ship broke apart, falling into Earth's atmosphere like burning meteors. Across the world, people saw fire streaking across the night sky. They thought it was the end, but it was not. It was victory. Admiral Korath stared in disbelief as reports reached him. Another carrier destroyed, thousands of soldiers gone in seconds. His fists clenched, his eyes burning with hatred. He demanded that his fleet crush the humans no matter the cost. He ordered ships to ram if they had to. He swore Earth would be broken before dawn, but his words no longer carried the same weight. His officers looked afraid. His crew looked shaken. The invincible Dominion was bleeding, and fear was spreading faster than his orders. Human warships pressed harder. Their stealth drones danced like shadows, cutting off supply lines and sabotaging weapons. Their railguns continued their relentless assault, firing again and again with deadly accuracy. Their fighters moved like lightning, carving paths through enemy squadrons. Every hour that passed tilted the battle further. The Dominion had come to conquer. Instead, they were being torn apart. In cities across Earth, hope grew stronger. Families whispered to each other that maybe they would survive. Soldiers in bunkers lifted their heads higher. Leaders of nations realized that the unthinkable was happening. Humanity was winning. For centuries, Earth had been ignored by the galaxy. Now the galaxy would have to take notice. On the Horizon Station, Aaron Blake allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. He looked at his officers, each one fighting with everything they had. He thought of the billions of lives depending on them. He knew the battle was not yet over, but he also knew something had changed. For the first time, humanity had proven that it was not weak. It was not prey. It was something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. And as he stood at the center of the storm, Aaron knew one truth: Earth would not bow. Not now, not ever. In the distance, Dominion ships continued to burn. Their once mighty fleet was unraveling. The humans had turned the tide, and the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if they too had witnessed the rise of a new power among them. The battle in orbit grew even more violent as the night stretched on. The Dominion fleet, once seen as an unstoppable force, was now fractured and desperate. Ships that had crushed countless civilizations were being torn apart by humans who refused to bend. The wreckage of fallen vessels drifted across the sky, glowing faintly as the remains burned up in Earth's atmosphere. But the fight was not yet won. The Dominion still had numbers, and their admirals still believed they could overwhelm humanity if they fought with everything they had left. On the Horizon Station, Captain Aaron Blake stood at the center of the command room. His eyes were fixed on the tactical screens, watching as Dominion squadrons tried to regroup. His officers worked quickly, shouting data across the room. The air was tense, filled with the sound of alarms and the constant hum of machines. But Aaron's voice remained calm. He spoke with steady authority, guiding his people through the chaos. His calmness was like a shield, keeping fear from spreading in the room. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell leaned over her console, her fingers moving rapidly. She tracked dozens of Dominion ships as they shifted into new formations. She saw how they were preparing to launch their heaviest weapons, desperate to break through the shields. She warned Aaron that the next wave would be their strongest yet. Her voice was steady, but her chest tightened with worry. She knew how much depended on the defenses holding for just a little longer. Commander Daniel Brooks walked among the soldiers in the lower levels of the station. He checked their weapons, their armor, and their readiness. These were men and women who had never fought in space battles before, but their eyes showed determination. They were ready to defend Earth even if it cost them everything. Daniel gave them quiet words of encouragement, telling them they were not just fighting for their lives but for the future of humanity. In the Dominion flagship, Admiral Korath was losing control. His officers shouted reports at him, their voices shaking. Ship after ship was falling, formations were collapsing, and morale was breaking. Korath slammed his hand against the command table, demanding that they fight harder, that they push through the humans no matter the cost. He ordered suicide runs, commanding cruisers to ram into human ships if their weapons failed. His rage filled the command deck, but even his fury could not hide the fear in his eyes. For the first time, he began to realize the truth. His fleet might not win. The Dominion unleashed their most powerful weapons, massive beams of energy, each one strong enough to shatter a continent, tore through space toward Earth. The sky lit up with their fury. For a moment, people on the ground thought it was the end. Families in shelters clutched one another, watching as the heavens glowed with terrible light. But then the shields shimmered again, brighter and stronger than before. The beams bent and dissolved, scattering into harmless sparks. Earth still stood. The world cheered as the skies held firm. Aaron gave the order to strike back. The railguns hidden in asteroid belts fired once more, their slugs ripping through Dominion battleships. Stealth drones swarmed the enemy, planting explosives and disabling engines. Human warships surged forward, cutting through enemy lines. Pilots like Megan Carter and Jason Hayes flew with unmatched skill, weaving between explosions and enemy fire. Their ships moved with speed and precision that left the Dominion helpless. Every strike from their weapons shattered another enemy vessel, leaving fire and silence in its place. Sarah Mitchell guided the drones into key positions, targeting carriers and command ships. She spoke calmly into her headset, her voice a lifeline for the pilots and drone operators. She felt no time for fear or pride. All she felt was focus. Every second mattered. Every decision saved lives. Her hands shook slightly from exhaustion, but her mind was sharp. She knew humanity had to press harder, to break the Dominion before they regrouped again. In the skies above Earth, Dominion ships began to scatter. Their once perfect formations were in ruins. Some tried to flee, others tried to fight on, but none of them had a clear plan. Chaos reigned in their ranks. Human ships pursued them relentlessly, striking again and again. The invaders who had once terrified entire galaxies now looked like prey, running from hunters they never expected. On the ground, people poured into the streets, watching the sky light up with fire. Children pointed upward, cheering as flashes burst across the darkness. Neighbors hugged one another, crying with relief and joy. Soldiers who had waited in silence for years now stood taller, knowing their training had not been in vain. The world was changing before their eyes. Humanity was no longer a hidden people. They were showing the galaxy their strength. Admiral Korath tried to regain control. He shouted at his officers, demanding that they regroup, demanding that they fight to the last ship. But his words fell on ears filled with fear. His crew no longer believed in victory. Reports poured in of destroyed carriers, of crippled cruisers, of fighters scattered and leaderless. His once proud fleet was being reduced to wreckage, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Aaron Blake stood in silence for a moment, watching the battle unfold. He knew victory was close, but he also knew the Dominion was dangerous even in defeat. They could still unleash destruction if they struck out in desperation. He ordered his officers to stay sharp, to push carefully but firmly. Humanity had the upper hand, and now they had to use it wisely. Megan Carter's fighter tore through another enemy squadron, her neural-linked reflexes guiding her faster than thought. She laughed softly into her comms, her joy breaking through the tension. Jason Hayes, flying alongside her, grinned as he reported another enemy destroyer falling apart under their fire. For them, the battle was more than survival. It was proof. Proof that humanity could stand against the strongest fleet in the galaxy, and not just survive, but triumph. In shelters around the world, hope turned into certainty. People no longer whispered if Earth might win. They shouted it. They believed it. The fear that had once gripped them melted away, replaced by pride. Humanity had faced the greatest threat it had ever known, and it was standing tall. The Dominion fleet was breaking. Ships burned, wreckage drifted, and their admirals screamed into failing comms. The invaders had come to conquer, but instead they were being erased. Humanity had not only defended its home, it had struck a blow that would echo across the galaxy. For centuries, the Dominion had ruled with fear. Now they had met something greater than fear. They had met humanity's will to fight. On the Horizon station, Aaron Blake looked around the room. He saw Sarah Mitchell, her eyes glowing with determination. He saw Daniel Brooks, his soldiers ready for whatever came next. He saw officers and engineers who had given everything to protect their world. And he felt something deep in his chest: pride. Humanity had stood together, and together they had achieved the impossible. As the last Dominion squadrons fell apart, silence began to spread across the battlefield. The once mighty fleet was no more than scattered wreckage. The stars above Earth glowed brighter, shining on a planet that had proven its strength. Humanity had survived. Humanity had won. And in that moment, every human knew the truth. The galaxy would never see them the same way again. The battle in orbit had reached its end. For hours, Earth had stood against the most feared armada in the galaxy. Now the skies above the planet were littered with fire and drifting wreckage. The Dominion fleet, once seen as unstoppable, was gone. What remained were broken ships, silent debris, and the fading echoes of a fight that had changed history. Humanity had done what no one believed possible. They had defeated the empire that had enslaved countless worlds. They had stood together and survived. On the Horizon station, Captain Aaron Blake stood at the command platform. The room was quiet now, the tension replaced by awe. Officers sat at their consoles, staring at screens that showed the battlefield. Pieces of Dominion ships floated like shadows across the stars. The danger was gone. For the first time since the invasion began, people allowed themselves to breathe. Aaron looked at the faces around him. Some were exhausted, some were smiling, and some were crying quietly. He knew every single one of them had carried the weight of billions of lives. He felt pride in his chest so strong that it hurt. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly from hours of guiding drones and tracking enemy ships. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle into her bones. She had given everything she had, every ounce of focus, and now the fight was finished. When she opened her eyes again, she saw Earth glowing on the screen, untouched and beautiful. Her lips curved into a small smile. Against all odds, humanity had held the line. Commander Daniel Brooks walked among the soldiers on the lower levels of the station. They cheered and clapped each other on the shoulders, their relief filling the halls. Many of them had expected to die, but now they were alive. Their eyes shone with pride as they realized they had been part of something greater than themselves. Daniel spoke to them quietly, reminding them that while the battle was over, their duty was not. They were guardians now, protectors of Earth and of humanity's place in the stars. On the ground, the world erupted in celebration. People poured into the streets, hugging strangers and shouting with joy. Families who had hidden in shelters ran outside, staring at the night sky lit with streaks of fire from the falling debris. For hours, fear had gripped their hearts. Now that fear had transformed into pride. Humanity had not just survived, it had triumphed. For the first time in history, every nation, every culture, and every family felt united. They were not divided by borders anymore. They were all children of Earth, and together they had done the impossible. In the Dominion flagship, silence ruled. Admiral Korath sat slumped in his command chair, his pride shattered. His officers were gone, his fleet destroyed, his empire humiliated. He could not understand how this had happened. How could a world of so-called primitives destroy the armada of the Dominion? His mind raced with disbelief, but the truth was clear. His fleet no longer existed. His empire had been dealt a wound it might never recover from. For the first time in his life, Admiral Korath felt powerless. For the first time, he felt fear. Across the galaxy, whispers spread. Word of the battle traveled fast, carried by traitors, spies, and hidden channels. Worlds that had lived under the shadow of the Dominion for generations began to hope. They had seen a new power rise, a people who had refused to kneel. The humans had destroyed the fleet that had crushed them for so long. For the enslaved, Earth became a beacon of defiance. For the rulers of other empires, Earth became a name spoken with both respect and caution. On the horizon station, Aaron finally allowed himself to sit. He leaned back, his eyes fixed on the stars beyond the windows. He thought about the cost. Thousands of human lives had been lost in the fight. Ships had been destroyed and cities had trembled. But he also thought about the victory. Earth was free. Humanity had stood together and proven itself. He knew this was not the end. The Dominion would not forget what had happened. Others in the galaxy would take notice. More challenges would come. But he also knew that humanity was ready. They had shown they could fight. They had shown they could win. Sarah Mitchell stood beside him, looking at the stars. She whispered softly that the galaxy would never be the same again. Aaron nodded. He agreed. They had stepped out of the shadows and into the light. They were no longer hidden, no longer underestimated. Humanity had revealed itself as a force unlike any other. The future would be dangerous, but it would also be full of possibilities. For the first time, Earth had a place among the stars. Jason Hayes and Megan Carter landed their fighters on the Horizon's hangar deck. The two pilots climbed out, their bodies aching but their spirits high. They laughed as they hugged their fellow pilots, proud of what they had achieved. They had fought against the best the galaxy had to offer and lived to tell the story. To them, the victory was not just about survival. It was about proving that humanity could stand with the strongest. It was about showing the galaxy that they belonged. On Earth, leaders gathered in secret halls to speak about the future. They knew humanity had changed forever. No longer could they live quietly hidden from the galaxy. They had announced themselves in the loudest way possible. They had destroyed the Dominion fleet. Now they had to prepare for what came next. Some leaders spoke of peace, others spoke of war, but all agreed on one truth. Humanity was no longer the same people they had been before the battle. They were stronger. They were united. They were free. Children played in the streets that night, pointing up at the sky and pretending to be pilots flying against the Dominion. Parents told them stories of bravery, of shields that had held, of soldiers who had fought, and of victory that had saved them all. The story of the battle began to spread even before the wreckage stopped burning. It would be told for generations, the story of the night Earth stood against the stars and triumphed. Admiral Korath's broken fleet drifted in silence. A few surviving ships fled into the darkness, carrying the story of their defeat back to the Dominion. They knew they would face punishment, but they also knew they had witnessed something history would never forget. Humanity had risen. Humanity had fought. Humanity had won. As dawn broke over Earth, the sun rose on a new world. The oceans sparkled, the cities glowed, and the people lifted their heads higher than ever before. They were no longer the quiet world that the galaxy ignored. They were a people who had stood together and defeated the strongest empire among the stars. The future stretched out before them, wide and full of challenges, but also full of hope. Aaron Blake stood by the window, watching the sunrise. He thought of the sacrifices, the bravery, and the unity that had carried them through. He whispered softly to himself that humanity had only just begun. And as the golden light of the sun spread across the earth, it carried with it the promise of a new age. Humanity had taken its first step into the galaxy, and the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if they too recognized the arrival of a force that could never again be ignored.